BeProvided Conservation Radio takes you from the Santa Cruz Mountains to Africa with expert interviews in wildlife biology, conservation, environmental education, ecotourism, and much, much more. Our interviews help bridge the gap between international and local conservation efforts. Learn how you can help wildlife, people, and the environment close to home and worldwide by listening to our episodes. Help us help you. Every little bit of education and outreach helps. Thank you for all you do and for your support.
Hi everyone, welcome back to BeProvided Conservation Radio. It's a new season. It's good to be back after such a long break. I am Marcia Civic, your host of BeProvided Conservation Radio. So thank you for all those who hung in and listened to some older episodes and got caught up on some of them. So thank you very much. I wish my guest today was around in schools when I had to make a decision on a career, and it would have made life a lot easier, or maybe a lot less career choices on my part, maybe. But anyways, my guest is joining me from London, and he is via Zoom. And this was actually recorded a week or so ago, but I had the pleasure of talking to him. And his name is Mark Haviland. He is the founder of Conscious Careers. He's the co-founder of Train My Generation, and also the vice chair of the Marine Conservation Society in the UK. And Mark has spent over 25 years in big corporations before moving on to these nonprofit corporations that he is forming. He's worked at Disney, CNN. He also fought the fight of helping stop some of the illegal ivory trade through combating online sales of ivory. So today we're going to concentrate on a lot of his work with Train My Generation and Conscious Careers. And with both of those, Mark is helping prepare our future generations in understanding their roles and how to bridge the gaps between community, education, and environmental restoration, and bringing them all together. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you like what you hear, please share with a friend. It's always good to share this information if you can. And we will be sharing information on how you can find Mark in our show notes. And those can be found at beprovided.com, which is www.beprovided.com. So thanks again for listening. Enjoy the show, and we'll be in touch. Thank you. I'm excited to talk to you today because I think your work is really important as far as blending education, community, and environmental restoration together. And I think that's something that we all need to learn more on how to do. And I think that's the only way we're really going to see success. So you started out with a background, what is it, 25 years in big corporate jobs like CNN and Disney, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. It seems like a long time ago. It's gone fast, but it was one of those typical sort of mid-90s career starts. Go off, get a job somewhere, earn money. That was the brief. And I really didn't have a plan, but met somebody on a bus, and then the Disney job appeared, and spent 9 wonderful years there. And then wanted a change, and somebody said, how about news? And I said, I don't do news. But they said, actually we need you. So I got 7 years at CNN after that. It was fabulous. Oh, wow. And with both companies, I managed to travel a great deal. I went to with Disney, I lived in Paris and Tokyo, as well as the UK. And CNN, I was an American company again, but got to travel around a lot. So I really got to see the world with those two companies. And then again, serendipity led me to Rakuten, the Japanese company. And so I got to know, having already lived in Japan with Disney, I got to work with the Japanese for 10 full years, which was fabulous. It's a fabulous culture. And again, when you understand the American, European cultures, because there are many of them, and then a core Asian culture, which is Japan, it was wonderful. So those corporate years were fantastic. I really enjoyed them, got lots out of them, and learned a lot.
I bet they're financially stable jobs, I'm sure.
Yes. I think what it also did was I got to work in those companies with so many different cultures to understand what matters, whether it's France, Germany, Spain, Italy, UK, Australia, Singapore, Brazil, US, and Japan. I think that was one of the things I took out so valuable. And it's given me a real perspective now of understanding the idiosyncrasies of each of these different cultures and why listening matters. Because you can walk into a meeting with all the technology that you might share in your own country and with many of the norms you might share, but there's such depth behind. And if you don't listen, if you don't pause and absorb, you don't get the difference. And I was able and lucky enough to do that. And so I learned about those differences and how important they are in doing any work that we want to do that crosses borders.
Right.
You got to listen first. And that's one of the biggest learnings I took out of that time.
And then how did you start to transition into getting into the nonprofit work that you're doing now? That's a big change. You're going from a pretty kind of stable world to one that's a little challenging, I'm sure, to get up and going in some respects.
It seemed very natural in the sense that particularly in the previous 15 years of working for these companies, I started to understand what people thought and where people came from, and thought, hold on, there's a lot of very different backgrounds going on here. And I wasn't really, in my 80s education, didn't really get a lot of exposure to that. But gradually, throughout Disney, CNN, and Rakuten, I learned that other people have different lived experiences and need to be listened to in different ways, and actually come from different communities that have very different levels of support, of wealth, and of experience. And so probably 15 years before I left Rakuten after 10 years, I started thinking, hold on, business is great, but business is only really great when it recognizes people and planet.
Yeah.
Because we've spent many of our decades, 50s, picking a decade, making money, businesses doing stuff, creating wealth, and thinking that the world's too big to fail. And it's clearly not. Communities aren't too big to fail. Rivers aren't too big to fail. Forests, soil, none of these things are too big to fail. But we've been acting as though they are for decades. And that realization grew on me, admittedly, far too late. But still, it made me pause. The last 3 years I had at Rakuten were entirely dedicated to sustainability. And credit to them, when I came to them after working in commercial and marketing in tech and all these kind of things, I said, I'd really like to focus on sustainability. There's so much this company can do because it operates in so many countries that can support communities and environmental ecosystems and make the money it needs to pay its workers and create an organization. And they said, yeah, go do it. So I ran sustainability in the European region for the last 3 years and learned so much, met so many people, and realized, not only can I do stuff in the corporate world, but actually there's so much more I could do outside. And so Rakuten and I came to an agreement after 10 years, and I left, and it was the right time for me. And I was able to spend, and that was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So the last 2
just
years,
2 years ago. Okay.
Just 2 years ago.
Wow.
And the last 2 years I've spent exploring and spending time in schools, spending time in Kenya, spending time on the beaches, in the oceans, in the rivers, really learning what communities and the environment need, and seeing where business and these communities can work together for mutual benefit. We need people to have jobs. We need companies to create things. We need wealth creation functions around the world, but we also need that recognition of the resources that drive that need to be looked after. And so that it was a natural progression. And then I went straight into schools after that and have been creating these entities or working with these entities ever since. So it was a very natural progression for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Putting the listening lesson you learned to work. And I think that's great. So I want to talk about primarily 2 of your projects going on, but we can talk about as many. I know you have a lot going on. You're a very busy man. I wanted to hear a little bit more about your work in Kenya in Lake Victoria, and it's called, you co-founded an environmental group there, or it's not necessarily an environmental group, but it's called Train My Generation, a nonprofit. Yes. Yeah. So could you tell our listeners a little bit more about that? And
absolutely.
Why is there a need for something like that in Lake Victoria?
Absolutely. And there is a need for environmental and social regeneration everywhere.
Yeah.
And I was just lucky enough during a mentoring process while I was at Rakuten engaged with many universities around the world. And during COVID, executives were given the opportunity to do online mentoring and lectures with various universities. And I was lucky enough to speak to a university in Rwanda called AIMS, or the Advanced Institute of Mathematical Sciences, and speak to their students about business, about life, about corporates, anything that the university wanted us to talk about. And one of the students there happened to be a Kenyan from the Lake Victoria area. And I had said to students, if you want to catch up after the session, drop me an email. And he did. And that was 2020. And his name is Vincent, and he's a resident of this fabulous island called Mufungano on the Kenyan side of Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is shared in the north with Uganda, the south with Tanzania, and the west, a small slice with Kenya. And there's an island there with 20,000 people that Vincent came from. And we spoke about the island. We spoke about the prospects the community has, the challenges the community has, the beauty of the community, and where the culture lies, the Luo community, which is very significant in that part of Africa. And we just got on and we decided, let's work together to see what we can do for that community, because the island's beautiful. It's 65 square kilometers of green heaven.
Yeah, I saw photos of it. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's absolutely a beautiful place. But Lake Victoria has an extraordinary history. Sadly, back in the day, the British colonial government, who was, let's say, in charge at the time, back in the 50s and before, introduced a non-native fish species, the Nile perch, to the lake. And 20, 30 years later, that Nile perch developed and created a lot of wealth, but also ate everything else. Yeah. And so there was a boom and then a bust. And that's what we're experiencing at the moment. Fish stocks have collapsed. Then you've got deforestation around the lake. You've got climate change, which is a challenge in many respects. And so you've got real environmental challenges there, which affect economic and social being. And so the health problems, the wealth problems, the employment problems, a wonderful, peaceful community, but really struggling. And with COVID, a lot of the support structures, be it public or private, fell away. And so Mufungano was left on its own. And so we, as a group, Train My Generation, I'm second to Vincent in co-founding this organization. He picked this name because it's about training his generation. He's a young African with wonderful ambitions and passion for his community. And he just wanted to see his compatriots, his peers, his juniors, get the education they need to make the right decisions for themselves and their community. And so Train My Generation is about education. So we've developed some tertiary education opportunities for kids on the island in the technical college, about environmental restoration. So we've planted over 1,000 trees. It's about women's health, as crucial as anything else. Period poverty is a big issue in that region. The items needed are just too expensive and hard to get hold of. And so that becomes a real hindrance to the development of the female population. And women in general have struggled not only in school, but of course later in life. So all of these issues that we're starting to address, education, health, environmental restoration, and the premise of the team is not to become a big charity. We don't have the resources to do that, but we want to wave the flag of Mufungano across Kenya and further abroad to say, this is a Kenyans for Kenya opportunity. Bring what you have already in Kenya, in Africa, to the island. All that resource, all that expertise exists, but not on the island. So bring it to the island. So we've had some great wins in organizations that have come to the island and provided their expertise. And not only physical expertise, but also the hope, yes, we can do this. And the energy you get then from the local community to innovate on their own and just run with it, that's the perfect scenario that we hope for.
It is, yeah. And that's how things are going to be sustainable and keep working, because they're doing it themselves. And,
absolutely.
Wow. So this just started up a couple of years ago, and it sounds like you already have had some good success with getting things going there. That's wonderful. So
we have. And just to add a thing to that, while there's immediate things that need to be addressed, this is a long-term project. Vincent and I and the rest of the team have basically said, this is a 30-year project. We're committed to this for 30 years because the trees we plant in the school grounds of Mufangano this year and last year will be the trees that we want to sit under in 30 years' time. When I'm 80, I want to return to Mufangano and sit with my friends and my extended family, as they have become to me, on the island under the trees that we planted in the last few years. And that just gives us a vision of where we want to go, knowing that every year we've got to be doing stuff, bringing in new members, bringing in new supporters, bringing in opportunities for the local youth to be their own solution, to create the community that they want to live within. And that 30-year goal is it's a nice end cap. I'm not sure I'll be able to travel there after I'm 80, so that's where that limit comes from. But the value will go on and on.
Yeah, that's great. I bet you'll be able to travel there when you're 80.
That's the plan. Keep myself healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, so it has to be a challenge because with the fishing industry crashing on Lake Victoria, that they depend so much on that. And and you plant trees now, it does take a while for them to grow. Is there any other type of money coming in? Is there tourism that comes to the island at all? Or are there safari lodges or anything like that people can, or tourist lodges, not necessarily safari, but yeah.
So there are some lodges and hotels that exist on the island. COVID really set everything back.
Okay.
It really did. And interestingly, when you look on a map, when you go south from Europe to Africa, you tend to fly into Nairobi. And what tourists tend to do is hang around Nairobi or go to the parks, which are largely central or eastern Kenya, or they go all the way east to the coast, to the Kenyan coast, where they holiday there. So it's a safari and beach. Very few people go to Nairobi and then head west.
Okay. Is it difficult or is it?
It's a little less accessible, but not really. But it's not built up as a tourist destination. I just don't think it's really been seen. People go to East African countries and others because of the wildlife, because of the parks, because of the beautiful coastline. Everywhere you go, you get the hospitality that you might expect. They are some of the most open, most friendly, most warm and welcoming communities I've ever been to. But there's less wildlife. There's less infrastructure, and there's a lot of Kenyan tourists that go west. And this area of Kisumu and the shoreline of Lake Victoria is absolutely stunning. But they don't quite have the infrastructure there as yet. There is actually just the president of Kenya, Ruto, visited that region just last weekend, and that's part of a big sort of investment plan that they're looking at, including Mufangano, some road building that they're doing there. So there is some investment going in that direction, but I think tourism is not really a hot income generator at the moment. There's a lot of agriculture and aquaculture that is developing in the region. So commercially, it's always very interesting, just a little less so on the tourism side. But I would recommend anybody with a hint of an adventurous soul, Mufangano, Homa Bay, which is that county in that area, Kisumu. These are extraordinarily rich cultural places, and the welcome you would get is fabulous. It should be a tourist destination. It can be a tourist destination, and I'm going back there every year. That is reasonable for me to productively go there. But maybe as it develops, tourism will develop too.
Nice. The pictures I've seen look gorgeous. Of course, they show beautiful beaches and such. Yeah, it looked wonderful. And you mentioned some agriculture and aquaculture. What are they working on there as far as getting things going?
The shorelines of Lake Victoria have historically been, well, over the last few decades, very productive agricultural lands and industrial as well, not just agriculture. That area is highly productive. I mean, the communities there have been very effective and efficient in developing a sort of a local economy. Aquaculture is growing significantly, largely because there are fewer fish. The fish stocks are really significantly dwindled. And so you get these fish farms on the lake. And these are developing the economy there, they're providing jobs. Aquaculture around the world is largely, I would say, in its developmental phase. There are still so many problems with it. There's still so many risks. It really needs to be managed. It can have significant implications for the local habitats, the natural or the wild species that live there. But when you look out over the lake at night, you can see two fishing industries very busy. One is these squares of aquaculture, these nets, these cages where a lot of the Nile perch and the tilapia are being raised. And on top of that, there's this other form of fishing, which is much more, it's not quite subsistence, it is commercial, but it's individual fishermen going out, setting up lights, which attracts the small fish. They collect the small fish and go. But there are hundreds of these lights, hundreds of these lights. And so there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of millions of fish being caught all the time, which is really affecting the stocks there. And it's just the stock levels are unsustainable. So one of the reasons why we wanted to get the education going is to get the youth into new industries. It's not just about fishing. These are traditional fishing communities. And if they don't have a job, they get hold of a boat, or they join a boat, they join a crew, and they go out and fish. But if you teach them how to get great at carpentry, at masonry, at plumbing, at metalwork, at stitching, at needling, at beauty, any of these industries that will generate wealth, generate value, and not dwindle an already under pressure fish stock, that's really important. There are plenty of opportunities. It's such an intelligent community, but with a really thin layer of tertiary education. So we were able to get 55 students into this one technical college last term for the last year, early 2023. We hope to do the same at the beginning of this coming term. And that's 350. As we go on, we want to get more and more people educated as to create industries that are constructive and that leave the lake to reduce its pressure, to reestablish itself as a wonderful source for the community.
Yeah, that makes sense. Congratulations. That sounds like you're making great strides in that. And is there fear that these people you're educating, that they're going to be able to just get off the island and go somewhere else and use their expertise there, which is good in a way too, but it's not staying on the island? Does that make sense? Yeah.
It does. And this is a choice. This is their choice. This is not me or anybody else saying this is the job that you need. This is the job that you must have. It's opportunity, isn't it? It's really saying, here are some options. One of the examples is that I use a lot when you're looking at primary education. A lot of the primary school kids don't know the shape of their island.
Wow.
And if you don't know the shape of your island, you don't understand your island, you don't necessarily like or even love your island. And if you don't love your island, what's the connection? And you'll go and find a job anywhere. And so getting the younger kids particularly to understand their island and their community and its value and where it's been and where it could go, all it does is provide options. Yeah. God forbid we tell people what to do, let alone me with this white face. It's literally helping the TMG, the Train My Generation team, to provide the opportunities that they think are important for their community. Then the community makes its own choice. That's the key. And people will always leave the island. That's normal. I mean, that happens everywhere.
Yeah, at least they have the opportunity to do
absolutely
it in a way,
and that's not always a bad thing. If you go to Nairobi or if you go to Kisumu or even further abroad, you generate you develop yourself, and you one day come back, you bring in funds, you bring in education yourself. So it's part of a cycle.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. What do you see moving? How can people get involved with this, with Train My Generation, and help this go along?
Whether it's Train My Generation on the island of Mufangano or any other small community, the first thing that I would ask everybody to do is just find somewhere in the world that they might strangely, through their own lived experience or just through something brand new, develop an affinity with and to learn from. Kenya, the Lake Victoria doesn't necessarily resonate with everybody, but there are communities around the world. There's almost a pairing that we need to do with every citizen with another part of the world, not to send money to necessarily, but just to create an affinity with. And the more you understand about a distant and different community, the more you start to question your own behaviors, the more you inform your own behaviors and become conscious about what you do. And if that's putting your time, your money, your resources, your contacts into helping anybody, and it could be at the end of your own street, let alone in another country, it doesn't matter. But just to realize a connection with another community in a different scenario than your own, that is, I think, the foundation of a global community that needs to be a little bit more understanding of each other. Because it's not just about economic growth, it's about everything that living does for us. It's our broader happiness, it's our broader knowledge, it's the communication, the conversations that we can have with people in different scenarios. So I would ask everybody to find their own community that resonates with them and spend some time learning about it. And then you can decide what resources or what time you want to put towards it.
Yeah.
Specifically, great. I'll just say specifically, Train My Generation. We have a website, trainmygeneration.info. Mm-hmm. And we only raise, $10,000 a year? That's all we need. We're not trying to be this big gift machine. Mm-hmm. It's just to enable people to go in. So we do look for small donations, but nothing too big. And maybe it's a great starting point for people to understand a different community.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I think we get too used to living in our own little separate bubbles, even locally here. I may not talk to the neighborhood next door as much as I should to figure out what we should do for fire control or something like that for wildfires. But yeah, we need to open our eyes and listen more to each other. I think that's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this leads us into another passion project of yours. You're co-founder of Conscious Careers. And I'd like to learn more about that. I wish I would have had that around when I was going into environmental engineering back in the day. So I think it would have helped me give a little more focus on what I could do and what was really helpful. Yeah.
So Conscious Careers came about because after I left corporate life, my first decision was I'm going to go and spend time in schools. Yeah. Loving kids, loving schooling. My father was a teacher and he taught me, which is a rare experience. So I saw teaching from a different perspective. I looked at my dad and my teacher in the same moment, and that was an adjustment. But it's one I found really valuable. And he's been a great teacher and father to me. And so I wanted to go into schools. And I found that while there is plenty of careers, when I say this, there isn't plenty. There exists careers education. There exists a system for helping people understand the careers. It's wonderful, full of wonderful people, but it's misdirected by the system. The question that is asked by parents and by teachers is, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
And this, for me, is the wrong question. Because when you're 13, 16, even 18 or 20, you have no idea. You're asked this question, you just don't have the answer.
Exactly.
And what it does, not only don't you have the answer, but it puts pressure on you to have an answer. And then suddenly you find yourself forced. I've got to have something. I've got to get on. I've got to have what's my goal in 5 years' time? These are terrible, pressurizing questions. So I, having experienced this in a few schools, said, no, I think the question we should be asking is, what do you want to do in the world? What problems do you want to solve? What projects do you want to be involved with? What about the world interests you? So you start with the world in mind. So I developed Conscious Careers with an emphasis on whether it's an hour or 6 hours or a 2-day seminar to talk about what's going on in the world, not in an academic sense, but in a real world. This is happening now. This is not about geography or history or politics. This is about the real world and what role you can play in it. And that landed really well with the teachers, really well with the students. And the simple idea is to take them through, take the children through what I've now identified as the 6 major disruptions that the world is going through, and to see not fear, but opportunity.
Yeah.
Now, this is not a new idea. These disruptions have been identified by many in the past. But what is new is saying to a child, no, don't start with yourself in your career planning. Start with the world. Mm-hmm. And they go, okay, let's look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Let's look at the World Economic Forum Global Risk Register. Let's look at these 6 disruptions. Let's look at where all this fear is coming from and turn that fear into confidence, into opportunity.
Yeah.
And then when they do that, they're much better placed to make academic career decisions and then work career decisions that would work for them. Can you hear my dog in the background?
I can hear your dog. Yeah.
She agrees.
Yes, that's good.
Just to finish off that, the more time I spent in schools, the more I realized kids were getting the wrong advice. Mm-hmm. And we cannot afford for kids to get the wrong advice. And there are too many behaviors, instincts that we want them to develop, that this current ecophobia that we're placing on top of them, this narrative of negativity that diminishes their optimism and confidence, and nobody makes good decisions. Nobody can make good short-term, let alone long-term decisions if they're sheltering. And so I was in a school today, and they start off relatively negative and pessimistic about, the world's going to end here, or by 2030 we're all going to burn, and all this kind of stuff. And all this, while it's important messaging, it's literally only giving half the story. So yes, there is a problem, but look at this wonderful opportunity that each of us have to be part of the solution. And there are so many wonderful problems in the world. There are wonderful expanses of opportunities. So whether you want to be a lawyer, a doctor, a medic, an accountant, whether you want to start up your own business, go into banking, there isn't a career. There is not a job where you can't be of value to your community. And that's the general ethos that I'm getting across. And it's practical because there are distinct industries that are developing in the blue economy and green economy specifically that demand skills from everybody. It's not just engineering, it's not just technology, it's not just scientists, it's the humanities, it's the arts, everybody with an early understanding of the opportunity of the role they can play, an increasingly influential role as their careers develop.
That's great. Yeah, because I think we were taught if you wanted to work in the environment, you're either going to be a conservationist or a wildlife biologist, or you're going to be an environmental engineer. And now as I talk to more people on this podcast, you realize people are changing the world as lawyers, as even doctors and artists and photographers and whatever. If you're creative, you can still change the world in many ways.
Absolutely. So, yeah. And heroism comes from the least expected areas. Yeah. And three of them are clearly identified by many, but I talk about a lot. Accountants are the new superheroes, because we used to focus all our accounting brains and technique on financial accounting. But because we need to measure the world around us, we're now having all these other data points that we need to measure, be it environmental data or social data, technological data. And so the accountants can really tell us the picture of the non-financial accounting that is needed for us to make better life decisions, be in business or at home. And then you've got the lawyers. This is a fabulous bunch. If you want to be a real eco-social hero, become a lawyer. That's one. If that's your passion, you can do that. Because I tell you what, there's a great deal of law coming along, regulations, and there are a great deal of lawsuits coming on that are threatening people who are bad players, and the law is going to make them behave.
Yeah, you need good lawyers.
And the third one is finance, of course. Money, it can be a bad thing, but it also can be an incredibly positive tool.
Right. That's great. What grade levels do you start working with to get these messages across? Are you just kids going into college, or do you start younger? Yeah.
The whole lot. So 13, 12 has been on the younger end, and I work up to 22, university, college graduates and students. The conversation might vary a bit, but they all absorb it because it's all fascinating stuff. And when you look at the 6 disruptions, which I'll tell you about, it covers everything. This is a generalist topic. It's not just about being an environmentalist, as you said. It's about health, it's politics, it's economy, it's technology, it's the environment, and it's society. So all of these demand, so they're relevant to every student. And they're relevant to every age because you just pitch it slightly differently. And there's one particular process that we go through, which is this hackathon. Once we understand what's going on in the world, we also understand what our skill sets are. We then apply those to a global challenge. And the challenge is to come up with a business idea that not only helps solve that problem, but also makes money.
Right.
And this is a route to purposeful entrepreneurialism. The idea that you can actually start out, you don't have to go and work for a company. No, you can start up your own business that solves a problem and makes money. And so we go into this hackathon, and everybody goes off in groups, comes up with these ideas. What's the company called? Where's it going to operate? What's the product? How's it going to make money? How's it going to do good? What's the operations like? What's our branding? And then they come back and present in a Dragon's Den style.
Oh, nice.
And so they do all this teamwork stuff as well. They do all this problem solving, this critical thinking, this design engineering, all this project work and presenting, and how you engage and influence others, all part of the process. So they're learning all these things by osmosis and actually coming up with ideas not only that do good, but make money. And that's probably one of the most important areas, is that businesses aren't all bad.
Right.
Some businesses are because they don't recognize the value of this 360-degree thinking. But if you can solve a problem and make money so you can pay your workers and build your business and invest in other things, that's the golden fleece. That's the real gem. And it's the B corporations, started off in the States, spreading around the world. There are a lot of purposeful organizations, Patagonia is a big one, that are really deciding that nature is our shareholder as much as our financial investors. We've got lots of other investors that aren't financial. So let's recognize all of them in the outputs that we have and in the inputs that we insist on. And that really brings the in-school sessions to a real sort of crescendo. And it's a lot of fun.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, and you mentioned you can start a business and make money, but it's also, it holds people's interest if they're going into these careers. There's passion, there's happiness probably that they're doing something that they love and that can do good. And that's a big part of it. Yeah, that's great. And so I got lost there for a second. I had a thought and I lost it. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I was just going to, oh, go ahead.
I was going to just, there's another really interesting dynamic to all of this, which is about different communities. We mentioned them earlier, talking about Train My Generation. But what I've really found is the time that I spend is mostly in state schools, or I think in the US you call them public schools or state-funded schools. And a lot of these schools in areas where there are fewer resources, there are more challenges that the communities face. And I also spend time in private schools or independent, relatively wealthy schools. And seeing the difference in dynamic between them is really interesting. Mm-hmm. You would think that there was an enormous difference and that one is just looking to get rich and happy and the other one is just trying to get by. I have found, anecdotally in my experience, an equal thread of social justice running through all of these groups. Now, it might be, let's say, 70% get it. There might be a 30% that don't. And frankly, they just want to run their shop, get their business going, whatever it is. Yeah. But most of the kids, no matter their background, see a value in what I think is a brand new cultural norm in business, which is making money and serving the communities that business relies on. And lots of businesses say it. It's not a greenwashing and social washing going on at the moment. But I really am uplifted by, well, of course, when I make this business, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'd like to help. These are the communities that I'd like to recognize. And this sense of just, they don't say it, but I translate it as not leaving people behind. Not trying to succeed just for my bubble, but actually seeing other bubbles exist. We all live in social bubbles to a degree, but recognizing the value of bringing other bubbles in and actually expanding our own bubble and saying, I see the difference. I know my friends are from a diverse background. And so I understand why where the value of this comes from. And so if there is a seismic shift in how businesses are run in 20 years' time, it's because teenagers today get the value of inclusion and integration, not in a formal sense, but in a cultural sense, more than we did, or I did when I was growing up, or I was given the opportunity to see. They're seeing that opportunity and they're doing it naturally. And that gives me the biggest burst of optimism, seeing what these kids wanting to do something just as well as something profitable.
Oh, that's great. And are you only working in the UK? Have you gone to schools in other countries, or are you?
So at the moment, it's just UK. Okay. Really, Conscious Careers is very young, but I'm having conversations with schools in the Middle East and in Scandinavia. Ireland, and I might even, hopefully something in Chicago might come along. But I'm welcome. It's the funding is difficult, but schools don't have a lot of money, and I need to feed my family. I need to pay the bills. So I'm looking for sort of foundations to help me do this. And of course, traveling, it costs a lot of money, and it's also got an environmental footprint. So there's an online element to this that I want to develop. There are various platforms that I'm talking to about getting this ethos, this process, this thought process into an online platform that can then spread and be easily transmittable around the world. One-to-one, face-to-face, group in a room together is always the best.
It is.
But it's just not as scalable as I'd like to be. So I realize I've got to get online. I've got to find ways to engage audiences further apart, and create other advocates who will take this message on and become conscious careers advocates in every city. That would be fantastic to infuse this into academic institutions wherever they think it's valuable.
That's great. So you said you've gotten good support from parents and educators, and have you been doing this long enough to see any groups of students actually take these projects that they create, these hackathons with you, and kind of start to move forward? Or is that too young in this process?
Too young in this project. These students are like the trees we planted last year. They're still growing, and so it's it's a measurability question. How do we know we're having an impact? And only in 30 years do we know. But what is immediate, and I've had countless moments of this, is just seeing the look on a child's face when they just get something that they hadn't got before, when they've been given permission to think about something, because that permission is probably the wrong word, but they've been given the opportunity to think about something or a perspective that they hadn't thought before. And some of the kids I've spoken to simply didn't think they were right for that. That's not what I'm going to be. I can't do that. I'm here and I'm there. There's the ceiling that exists in the mind of so many children. And there's one guy I spoke to. It was just seeing where his eyes were looking around the room. You could see him seeing something he hadn't seen before in his mind's eye. And from the beginning of the session, where there's doubt, who's this guy? What's this boring topic going to be? To the end of the session, be it an hour or 6 hours, and the energy that they have. So there's an immediate recognition. At least there's a chance that the sprouts, that seeds have been sown here that can then influence their decisions and their opportunities later on. The long term, we'll see. But the more kids I can get to, I think the better.
Exactly. How can people help you along with this project, with Conscious Careers, or if they want to become a conscious career advocate, like you mentioned, do they contact you, and how do they contact you? Yeah.
I would love, it's very organic at the moment.
Yeah.
Every school I go to either invites me back again or gives me the number of another school. Often these schools in the UK are part of a trust, so there are multi-academy organizations and one leads to another. Oh, you've come to one, now's time to be introduced to the other 5 or 6. So it's been very organic, but I will get into as many schools as I can in the UK. Consciouscareers.co.uk is the website, and it pretty much says it all there with my contact details. And what I find is some independent schools are able to pay me, and then you have a model which is buy one, give one. So when I get paid to go into a school to at least cover expenses and pay for my own children, etc., then I can go and give a free session to a school that doesn't have the same resources. So that's one model. The other model is I'm speaking to some foundations at the moment to see if they can fund me to go into X number of schools in this region or that region. One conversation I'm having at the moment is a foundation that says, listen, I'd like to get you into 20 schools. Mm-hmm. We can fund you to do that. Let's get the price sorted out. And then you just go and do it. And then show us the impact, show us the picture, interview some of the kids and the rest of it. That's the sort of the way it works. Internationally, it's probably going to be more online. It's harder to justify traveling.
Yeah.
But I do want to go and speak to kids in Chicago and Iceland and Scandinavia and the Middle East and Ireland. To get that experience, every school I go to, I learn more how to engage with kids. I'm 52. While I was a 13, 18-year-old, I'm not anymore. These kids are going through very different worlds.
Yeah.
So the more time I spend with them, the more I learn how they think, the challenges that they're going through, the processes that they're going through, and can help adapt myself, because every session needs to be adapted to them. And some of them are mainstream and some of them are special needs. So it's a learning procedure for me. So anybody who can get me into a school, 13 to 20, college, uni, whatever it is, I'd be very grateful for that contact. The more, the better.
That's awesome. I'll put all your contact information in the show notes, and
thank you.
Link. Yeah, that's wonderful. And you have a couple kids, I believe, a couple boys. And are they involved with this as well?
Yeah, they're my product development team. I talk them through. Yeah, I talk them through my content. I talk them through the ideas I'm talking about, the format. They've been so useful.
Oh, good. Do they go, Dad, that's just crazy, or give you good pointers? Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's through osmosis, I think they're getting this message to themselves. I've actually been into their school as well to speak to them, but they're 16 and 18. They're going through the same challenges and the temptations and the extraordinary breadth of inputs that teenagers get these days. But they're really onto it. They understand the complexities of society now. And that leads to the most important thing, which is just being conscious about the decisions you make, be it your career, how you interact with people, the judgments that you make. It's pausing for thought and being, maybe it's not quite like that. Maybe it's a little bit like that. Maybe I don't know. Let's listen a little bit more. And if that's what we can instill at a minimum into our children of any age, that sets them better up to make their own decisions. It's not to tell them where to go, how to think, what to do. It's to give them the thought tools to make more credible decisions that will serve them and their communities better. But all of this has been helped. I'm a trustee at the Marine Conservation Society in the UK.
About that, yeah.
And I've been that for 8 years. And I got a passion for the seas. I sailed across the Atlantic when I was young. And there are so many things from the ocean that we can learn, not least because without the ocean, we're all dead. 50% of the air we breathe comes from the plankton generating oxygen out of the seas. Not to mention the fish and the well-being that we get from aquatic environments. But that's really helped bring to life these conversations in the classroom, not least with my kids, because everybody wants to talk about the sharks and the octopus and the starfish and the whales. It's a very emotive subject. And because of the time I've spent there working with businesses, government, schools, to bring the oceans into our lives so we understand how to protect it more, that's really worked well in conscious careers as a visceral visualization to bring all these stories to life.
That's great. Yeah, so you sailed around the world. How old were you when you did that?
It wasn't quite around the world. It was across the Atlantic.
Across the Atlantic, yeah.
Yeah, that was long enough for me. I was 18 at the time.
And that's young. Wow.
It was. I was the youngest on board, bar one. And it was a 3-month voyage down from the UK, down the west coast of Europe and Africa, and then across the Atlantic, past the Cape Verde Islands, across the Atlantic. 2 weeks of sailing on this beautiful tall ship, the square rigger, beautiful old-fashioned ship with 27 other people. Really learnt myself, let alone the oceans and the seas and the skies, and navigation and marine biology and how to get on. I learned a great deal on that trip. That was extraordinary.
Oh, yeah, what a great education. Yeah.
When you find yourself in the middle of the Atlantic and the nearest land is 10 kilometers directly down.
Yeah.
That's mind-blowing.
It is.
It's closer than that way, east or west. There's certainly nothing up above. The closest land is at the bottom of the ocean. Very humbling experience.
Oh, yeah. That's an amazing way to think about it. Yeah. So you've been interested in kind of this environment for a long time with the oceans and marine biology and such.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah. Were you always interested as a young boy, like your kid's age, or?
No, I don't think so. It wasn't part of education. I grew up in the center of England. It was not very connected to the seas. I sailed a bit on lakes, but no, it wasn't a childhood thing. It was, all of this has really been mid-30s onwards.
Yeah.
And I said earlier that that's regrettably too late to start thinking about the resources that we rely on age 35 or whatever, that's just too late.
Yeah.
And
some
so
people say it's never too late, though, really.
It's never too late. And so I'm making up for lost time. There's no question. But how about making that connection age 5, let alone 13, 18, making the connection in our junior years, and making people realize that nature isn't something to be afraid of. It's something to be careful of. And this health and safety environment we live in, this parents are driving this, schools are driving this, society, businesses are driving this idea that no, nature, it burns, it stings, it's hot, it's cold, it bites, it's unpredictable. Nature's to be avoided. Now, how, if we think nature is to be avoided, how can we even form a relationship with it, knowing that without it, we're really doomed?
Right.
So creating a love for nature, or a curiosity and a carefulness of it, even if you end up being a lawyer in a city, in a bank, and whatever, just never really connected, but recognizing that nature is something that you rely on and can play a role in your own happiness. I think that's the point.
It is. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I started all this too late too, but I feel like whatever we can do to help is great.
The next 30 years dedicated to it.
Yeah, me too. So hopefully you'll be sitting under that tree on
Mufangano, yes.
Mufangano Island with your friend. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to, at that point, recognize that I've done a lot of my own learning over the last 2 years when I've been actually dedicated to this, for several years, partially dedicated to it. But the people that I've spoken to who have been dedicated to this for far longer, they saw the light much earlier than me, have been amazing and critical in my own journey. And back to that point about listening to other communities, listening to other people who don't do what we do, and finding a spot of nature, or it might be about society, it might be social justice, it might be health, it might be education that we feel close to or that we would like to understand more. Speaking to people who've dedicated their lives to it, I think is critical, because they are unrecognized. There are plenty of volunteers doing work here, but there are plenty of people who've dedicated their careers to it, and in some cases impoverished themselves as a result, but don't mind, because it's about a passion, and they live the way they live and they give the way they give. And spending time with those people, so enlightening. They've given their time for me. They're givers, and I've learned so much. And so the more time I can give, the same, whatever the age, because there are plenty of people going through career cycle changes when they're 30 or 40 or 50, that too, it's not just 16, 18-year-olds that needs to feel a connection with nature and society and to see what purpose they can develop or redevelop. Any age can feel this, and any age can suddenly switch, suddenly be of real value to the community that they live in.
Well said. I like that. Yeah, I've seen people change in their 60s and 70s that lived in cities, and all of a sudden during COVID realized there's birds singing out their window that they could have been watching all their lives. So
absolutely.
And then falling in love with nature that way. Thank you, Mark. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners before we're coming close on the hour? So our time is almost up. Yeah.
I've had such a fun hour talking to you. I love talking about this stuff, and I would love to talk to anybody about it, because never through serendipity comes opportunity. I found that in my career, and I found that in the last few years working on this. And anything that touches this idea, that Venn diagram that we spoke of earlier, that is community engagement, environmental restoration, and education, where those three ideas or needs meet, that's where real value sits. And commerce and government and everything else comes off that. If you can tick those three things at the same time, or want to talk about those three things and how you might want to get involved, I'd be happy to speak to anybody. The community I've relied on is a community I want to give back to. That's the last thing that I would like to say, but I've really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you for all you do. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
Well, this concludes today's show. Thank you again for listening. Please visit BeProvided.com for show notes and more information about today's guests. If you like what you heard, please leave a review. Until next time, stay safe and stay healthy.